Let's go back to the audience for another question. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, and ask your question.
All right, my name is Kirsten, and I'm from Asheville. My question is, why the fixation on same-sex marriage? Why not the same opposition to divorce culture and the rate of children being given up for adoption when every child born into a same-sex marriage is thoroughly planned out, and surely husbands and wives divorcing weaken the institution of marriage much more than same-sex couples wishing to enter it?
All right, so Kirsten brought up a topic. This is actually a great time for me to have my next snap poll question of the evening. I'd like to put to the audience by sound of applause. Your choices and answers are yes and no. The statement is, the biggest threat to marriage is divorce. Those who believe yes, please applaud. Those who disagree, please applaud. So I know, Joe, you want to get on this. So what about the issue of, maybe, as Kirsten says, can we provide a loving home for someone with a same-sex couple as opposed to single-parent families as a result of divorce or other activities?
I think loving homes come in all different shapes and forms. I think being human is hard, having relationships are hard, and we're going to mess up sometimes. So people are divorced. I am divorced. So I think the question is, how can we do the best we can as faith communities and as a society and with the laws that we pass that help assure people the best possibility of having a committed relationship that will work for the long haul?
I don't think it's very loving to deprive a child of access to their biological mother or father. That to me is not very loving.
I have to say, I think that's a little bit of an assumption to make that all gay people do not have the biological parents involved in their lives. I have several friends who are in same-sex couples who have intentionally brought in people as donors so that they can have those types of role models in their kids' lives.
It further complicates things for children.
All right, we're back to the audience for another question, and then we're going to have to go back to our digital desk in just a moment. But I'll get another question. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, and ask your question.
My name is Carmen Ramos Kennedy, and I live in Asheville. My question is, some of the same language that's used against today's people that want to get married, same-sex marriage, was used against blacks and whites marrying. I'm curious where all of you stand on that. In Loving versus Virginia, that decision was, those ideas were shot down. I don't understand how you can be of God and not love everybody.
So, Ken, I hesitate to use the right term because I know I mispronounced the word. Miscegenation, correct? Miscegenation laws?
Well,
which used to prohibit-
anti-miscegenation, but the issue here is Loving v. Virginia was a 1967 case by the Supreme Court where the court did invalidate a law that forbade a black person and a white person from marrying each other. And in doing so, the Supreme Court recognized two things. First of all, that flew in the face of the 14th Amendment, that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments adopted after the Civil War were expressly adopted to end all laws of racial discrimination, and that was a textbook example of a law of racial discrimination. Now, insofar as the court then also spoke about a fundamental right to marry, the Supreme Court has made it clear over a century of jurisprudence that when you're talking about something not found in the text of the Constitution, like you said, which is why marriage is mainly a state issue where it is found in state constitutions, and not in most instances a federal issue, but where you're talking about a federal constitutional right not found in the words of the Constitution, it must be one that is essential to an American scheme of ordered liberty, and that the one test the court uses for that is, has it existed, is it deeply rooted in American history and tradition such that it was present from the founding of the Republic to the present and has had virtually universal acceptance. The union of one man and one woman has that, fits that criteria, and it is the only type of marital relationship that fits that criterion for a fundamental.
Let me get a response to the other side. Joe, do you agree with that?
I want to say again that I think that we can't ever get stuck in one time or place in history. And as we look at the Constitution, we have to remember that things change, society changes, the way we understand life changes. So maybe when it started, there was one man and one woman, but it's obvious that there's a lot more now than that. There's same-sex couples all over the place.
We can't reject history either.
We what?
Can't reject history either.
We can't reject history, but we have to live in the moment that we're living in. And what we're doing is we're discriminating against this population of our people. And the Loving versus Virginia, it was a racial discrimination, but this is a gender discrimination. And so that's yet another, and so I hope the Supreme Court will recognize that, whether it's now or in a few years, and bring that ruling.
I'm not sure I understand. Joe, are you saying that the words of the Constitution change? I mean, that's why it's a written document. It's written so that we all know what the words are. We pass a constitutional amendment. We don't invent new meanings for the words that are already there that contradict the previous meaning.
All right, so this is a great opportunity. I need to get to digital desk in just 1 second, but I want to put one more snap poll to our audience because it was brought up. It's likely the Supreme Court will rule on Proposition 8 and also the Defense of Marriage Act sometime in the coming days, possibly as early as tomorrow. They'll deliver an opinion. So my next question, your choices in response by sound of applause are yes and no. The question is, the U.S. Supreme Court, or it's a statement, the U.S. Supreme Court recently heard arguments in 2 cases regarding same-sex marriage, a challenge to California's Proposition 8 and the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. Regardless of what they decide, will the opinion they offer later settle this matter, or will it continue? So those who believe, will this settle the matter, please applaud. Those who believe disagreement will continue, please applaud. So regardless of what they come down, which side they come down on this issue, it's going to be a divisive issue for a while. I want to bring in our audience at home in this because I know that they have been deeply involved in this. I'm going to go back to our digital desk. Darcel, what do you have for us?
Well, the comments are pouring in, but I want to begin with the 2 snap polls. The last one, the biggest threat to marriage is divorce. So far we have 9 yes and 4 no. Now when we go to our other snap poll, is this a civil rights issue, a religious issue, or both? We have 30 saying it's a civil rights issue, 8 saying a religious issue, and 13 saying both. We also have some comments coming in this one is from Debbie Jackson Fox, who says, I thought the voters had decided this issue. Arnold Phillips says, what happened to our vote last November to keep gay marriage out of North Carolina? Some people were also commenting on that first snap poll. For example, Rosemarie Grace Vieira wrote, neither. It's no one's business. Why can't they be left alone to love each other just like the rest of us? The government and organized religion have created a new minority. Wake up, get out of the Middle Ages, and join the modern times. Howard Burrell Jr. wrote, religion has no place in government. And then Timothy Elkin says, marriage has no place in government. We also have a question, and this came from someone on Twitter. It is at Telkin16. I'm getting used to reading these Twitter handles. What does the panel think about the government not being involved in marriage at all?
So, Ashley, should government even be involved in marriage?
It's certainly a good question, isn't it? We seem to keep tossing this around, and we kind of keep dancing around the issue. And we get into First Amendment rights. We get into all kinds of discussions about religion, marriage, and whether or not marriage should be part of the government, religion should be part of the government. Personally, I don't feel like the government should be in the business of marriage. We know that when this was started, we know that when we look at history over time, that marriage has been redefined many, many times by churches, by governments, going all the way back to medieval times. It has been. And somewhere along the lines, even in, after the United States was even settled, declarations, the Marriage Act of 1836 happened in Europe, which then put in witnesses, government witnesses. That was the first real time government got into it. And now, years later, all these years later, now all of a sudden this has come back up. So there's a precedence there for the government not to be there. It was originally not a part of it. It was strictly a religious church issue.
So, John, you're a member of the clergy. and you certainly have some participation in marriage, but should the government have a role?
I think so.
Because?
Well, I think there are things in our culture like marriage that perhaps needs to be regulated, particularly as it affects the welfare of children. From my perspective, this is not about two adults loving one another. I think to try to reduce this issue to a matter of two adults loving one another is itself unloving to me, because it's much deeper than that.
And Mark, let me add to that. Ashley's statement is just not correct that this started in 1836. From the beginning of the common law, in fact, back to the rise of Western civilization, under common law, when someone gives birth, obviously we know one of the parents, it's the mother, because we know who gave birth. Under common law, for a married woman, her husband is automatically presumed as a matter of law, and has been for millennia, to be the father of that child, instantly having all parental rights over that child and all obligations to care for that child and to care for the mother who has gone through the trauma of childbirth. So it's not correct to say it started in 1836. I can rattle off countless legal principles that go back thousands of years involving marriage and government involvement in
I
marriage.
think you misunderstood what I said. I didn't say that's when it started. I said that was the first time the government required a witness for marriage. We can talk about history and marriage laws all this time, but we also look at who was actually running and writing laws at that time. We know that the church had a hand in laws, even back to medieval times.
All right, I'm going to go back to the audience for just a moment before I do. When Darcel read that comment from social media about getting out of the Middle Ages and joining the modern times, I had flashbacks thinking my teenage children were speaking to me. Let's go back to the audience. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, and ask your question.
Stephen Veltman from Weaverville, North Carolina. And I have a few points that I want to make and then just ask a few questions. Number one, I think if we go way back in history, there's probably a caveman or two that married a rock. But that's not what the debate is today, and it's certainly not about polygamy. I want to marry one man, not 7 or 8. That's not what this debate is about. And two, nothing in the Constitution about marriage at all. And the Bible does not run this country. The Constitution runs this country. And it seems to me,
Constitutional right to gay marriage.
I think this might be my turn.
All right, let's get the audience member.
We can
I
respond.
can't even hear you though.
Let's get the audience member question in, please.